What about now? Let me have a look. It's updating. What about now? There we go. Now we have clean audio. It's updating. Dodgy video. Right, we've had some technical problems trying to get this stream started, and the fact that my chat has disappeared just doesn't really help. Let me just refresh the page. Right, we should be good. Yay, goodness. Right, this won't be edited, because I can't be asked farting about. Because, you know, fart. Right, so where were we? With the truth and perceiving it, and how 5 plus 3 equals infinity, which is a vertical 8, horizontal 8. Infinity is a horizontal 8, which is why 5 plus 3 equals infinity. Are we there? Did we get that bit? That's what truth is. Truth is infinite, because truth is truth. It's concrete and substantive and objective, and it lasts forever. All agreed? Give me a thumbs up in the chat. Would be nice. With the yanus. Notifications. Yes. Yay, with the yanus, type quicker. Send me a message quickly. Quickly with the quickiness. Agreed, good, right. Truth. Truth is concrete. And infinite. Lasts forever. Because it's objective. It's why 5 plus 3 equals infinity. So first, we have perceptions, which are controlled by the 5 senses. But there is a 6th sense, and that 6th sense is knowledge. Or experience. And we accrue this over time by sensing things and how we perceive them. And that comes on to the second step of context. Because you have to experience things in the context in which they're derived, whether they're a single material object, and there's nothing else to it. That is the context of it. You are just presented with an object, and everything else is neutral. Or whether you find it a threat, or whether you find it something to love, and it's lovely, and you want to stroke it like a kitty cat. Stuff like that. You know, happy memories. Because memories build the knowledge. Memories only exist in a context. And the only reason you store memories is because of the context in which your perceptions were delivered. And that's where you come on to the third step of conceptualization. So are we following so far? You have things that you can perceive via your senses. There are 5 material senses and the 6th one called knowledge. Knowledge comes with experiencing things via the 5 senses in a context. Context is the second step. All agreed? Good, good. Let me know. I hate the delay on YouTube. Are we all good so far? Any questions so far? Gotcha. Right. So we move on to the third step of conceptualization. Now this is where you take what you have sensed in the context in which you have sensed it, and where you're going to place it in your knowledge as a concept. So what is a concept? A concept is how you explain an experience of something outside of the narrative of it. So you don't tell the story of how you came to know it. You know something and the principle of that knowledge is a concept. Does that make sense? I may have to explain that further. So let me know if you need that broken down. Because concepts seem to be the sticking point where people get unraveled. So you have your perceptions in a context, and that builds your knowledge base. And knowledge is explained through concepts. So principles, they're a concept of knowledge. Emotions, love, joy, shame, guilt, fear, these are all concepts of knowledge, of a perception in a context. We're going to go round in circles because that's how we know this is true. Please explain that further. So, say a phone. We experience this phone by being able to witness this phone with our eyes, and then we hear the things that come out of this phone with our ears, and we can touch the phone, and the phone may have a taste and a smell to it, but that's oblivious. And we experience this in the context of the material world. It is material. It is a thing. We can handle it. It is an object. And so that word, object, that's an object. It's a phone. We know it's a phone because of how we sense it and what it does for us when we sense it. So we have the senses in the context of an object, and those two go together. So that being a phone is a concept because it's a contextualized part of perception. Does that make sense? The concept is phone, but what we perceive is an object in a context, which is material world, reality, whatever you want to call it. The things that we can perceive, that is the context we are perceiving. And our perceptions are the senses. And the knowledge of what we are perceiving and the concept of this material world is the concept of phone. Does that explain concepts? I hope that explains concepts. Let me know. So what we name objects to give it a meaning, a definition, the definition that we can get from our knowledge of the perceived thing in a context, that is the concept. Names are concepts. Pronouns are concepts. The knowledge that we confer between each other with singular words that have a definition that give it its context as we perceive it. It works forward and backwards. So it comes from a principle. The principle is we can create something. So that is the base. That'll be explained in the next 3 steps. Anyway, so we've got to the concept. So we have the perception of the thing in context gives it a conception. And that is how we get to words, basically. That's how we form all language and how we name things. And then once we have a perceived thing in a context and we have conceptualized it, we can apply morals and ethics to it. How do we use this in a way that is non-harmful, that gives us a benefit universally without causing harm? That is the moral application that we apply to everything. And we can apply that to objects. Morals applied to objects are, if I use this object, will it be useful or will it be harmful? That's the moralization of objects. That's why morals are objective and universal, because they apply not only to objects, they apply to everything. That is another concept. Anyway. But as it applies to the use of that object upon one another, or the use of a concept upon one another, that can be morally considered, shall we say. And we run every action we take with every object or thing that we take it with or give it to or do it upon, and then we consider the outcome of it, or what we would like to be the outcome of it. That is the moral and ethical consideration of our perceived contextual concepts. Does that make sense? Are we following? That was step number 4. So we got 1, perception. 2, inner context. 3, provides conception, or a concept. And then 4th, we apply morals and ethics to the way in which we can consider the existence or use of that object or thing or concept that we have perceived in a context. We are there. That's step number 4. Are we all good? Are we keeping up? Let me know, or do we need more? I can make a separate videos on morals, because I was going to do that anyway. I was going to refer to a 2-year-old video that someone else made that said there can be no good and morals can't be subjective or objective. They're because they're a concept and we apply them because we're human. Good. Right. And then we reach the 5th step, which is revelation, which is basically all of knowledge that we can give to someone else that is true no matter what throughout time. The revelation is kind of the end point of the first 4 steps. So you have perceived something in a context which you can conceptualize, and then you can apply morals and ethics to it, and from that you reach the revelation, which is the wisdom of the first 4 steps. What have you learned? The learning bit. The thing that we carry forward with us and we impart to one another about the other 4 things. And how we explain them. Like this video. This video is the revelation of the first 4 things. I have perceived that I have a computer and the internet. I have put them in the context of I would like to use them as the objects are useful. I therefore have the concept of video and audio and combining them into a broadcast. Broadcast, there you go. So we have reached broadcast. From the perception of a material object in the context that I can use it to produce something, I have reached the conception of a broadcast. Morally and ethically, I would like to impart information that I think would be good and useful, and therefore provide a benefit without harm. That is the moral consideration of what we find to be good. It is a benefit universally without harm, regardless of who it affects, who watches it, who doesn't see it. And therefore the revelation is, yes, do it. Or we get to, no, don't do it. Or we get to, I would like to let other people know that this can be done. It's basically the we ought to. It is the ought from an is. It is not the is, and it is also an is from an ought. It works either way around. So have we got there with the first 5 steps. We perceive things in context, which provides conceptualization, which we then apply morals and ethics to, and we reach the revelation. Yes. True, tick, or lie, bad, false, negative, don't. It's either one or the other. It's either positive or negative. Or we can reach a neutral revelation, which is basically let it be, leave it alone. I can either find a use for it or a reason to get rid of it. The neutral revelation. Are we all good? Sounds good. Right, so we move on to the next thing, the addition. How do we add these things to certain principles? The 3 principles. So what are these 3 principles? The first one is principle itself. So once we've gone through the first 5 things and we've reached our revelation about the other 4, we can apply them as principles. That would be actions, so to speak. Logic trains, actions with logic behind them, principles. Things we should be doing or shouldn't be doing dependent on their use or application. Principles. Things that we hold solid as eternal truths that we work from because we apply the first 5 steps to them. First 5 steps arrive at a principle, can be applied to a principle, create the fractals of a principle. Are we there? Are we all good? Principles. The basis upon which you take an action because of your knowledge of it being beneficial or actively negative or neutral, such. And alike, and whatnot. Ergo vis-a-vis Doobie Firkin. Yes? If you're there in the chat, give me a hell yeah. Got it, right. And then we have the second thing, which is the fractal, or the parts thereof, which is if I apply this principle of the first 5 things, and what we get from them, and how we can apply them to the world, principles, then we get to the fractal, which is what happens when we apply the principle. Hell yeah, the parts thereof. So say you have the principle of headphones. Headphones are a perceived object in the context that they produce sound, which is the conceptualization of which we call a speaker or audio device. We then morally consider that we can use these as a benefit to listen to or project audio, and then we come to the revelation that, yeah, they're a positive. And then we apply the principle. Positive things are things that we should be doing, or we should have, or should exist. So headphones should exist. There's no harm in headphones existing. Whatnot. And then we have the fractal from the principle, which are the parts thereof, which is if I apply the principle of good nature, natural order, to the use of headphones, what happens? Someone hears a sound. That sound can be speech, music, a tone, audio, whatnot. They could be comfy or uncomfy. fractals, which is what do we get when we apply the principle? Are we all good? All of this is a system of logic that leads to truth. And the truth has to be from a principle in fractal. And then we'll get on to the next one when we get acknowledgement that everybody's understood this. Are people understanding? If people are understanding, give me another hell yeah in the chat or in the comments below. And while you're there, subscribe. You might like it. We are all good. And then we get to the third one, which is the circular, which is if it works from a principle, and the fractals can all stem from the principle and all relate back to the principle, and in part they all relate to each other, and it all makes sense, and it's all logical, and it all flows, and it's all one and unified and tasty, and we understand it. Then we get to the circular, which is how we understand all of truth and how we get to the infinite, because it is a loop. So you have a principle, you have what happens when you apply that principle, which are the fractals, and then you have the circular, which is truth. Which is when you have a principle that you separate into fractals, you arrive at the point where you can link any of the fractal bits of it back to the principle, and they all make sense. As the fractals relate eachly, separately to the principle, and as they stem from the principle, linearly. So it works principle, linear, circular, whole, truth. And then you're like, well, where do you get the infinite from? Well, that comes back to the first 5. Once we have established all of this, that we can perceive, we add context to that perception. That allows us to arrive at a concept. With that concept, we can apply morals and ethics. That leads us to the revelation of yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. This is how we build our principles. When we apply our principles to things, we get the fractal, which is the nature of what comes from the use of the principle upon anything. And then you have the circular, which is when you try to relate the fractals back to the principle, they all make sense. No matter which fractal you apply to the principle, it is true. It comes as a yes, a tick, an okay, that makes sense, logical, linear, line, from words, which are the concepts of our perceived things within a context, which we can then apply morals to, which then leads us to a revelation, which brings us to a principle. And when you apply that principle, you get the fractals, and then that's how you get to the circular. So you get the 5 plus the 3 equals truth, infinitely, because it comes round, it crosses over in the middle, and it goes back to the beginning. And it doesn't matter which way you go round it, how many times you go round it, it is there, it is always there, it is permanent and infinite, it is wisdom, it is the gathered knowledge amongst time that remains true for all of time, has started as truth, will be truth, and end as truth forever. Are we all good? Because I'm about to throw a whacking great spanner in the works. So do we see? Do we believe? Do we have faith in this truth? Are we there yet? Are we knocking on heaven's door? Very good. Right. The spanner in the works is when people like to use this dodgy word called interpretation. The miracle of interpretation. I have faith. Yes. My brothers and sisters in the Lord. But interpretation. They'd be like, no, that's just your interpretation. And it's like, well, try and break it down. Try and snap it in half. Try and break the infinite loop that I've just taught to you as truth. Where does it break? Where do you see these things? Oh, that's your interpretation. Interpretation of what? Words? Words are concepts. Concepts come from a perceived thing in a context that we have named and then applied morals to, which brings us to the revelation. And then once we have the revelation, we can apply it as a principle. And when we apply the principle, we get the fractal, and as any part of that fractal relates back to the principle, it is circular, and it loops back on itself, and you can do it forwards, backwards, sideways, up, down, standing on your head, licking something spiky, whatever you want. It all remains true. You cannot break it. There is no lie in it. I'm not lying. How do you prove it's a lie? Because one of the bits won't be true. One of the fractals will not relate back to the principle. That's how you know something's a lie. That's how you know something is bad. That's how you know that the revelation you have come to, or should have come to, when you've applied the morals to the concept in the context of perceiving it. See, forward, backward, sideways, up, down, it all applies to itself. That's how you know things are bad, a lie, that we ought not to. That all things considered, no, that the principle you arrive at says don't, says this is bad, says we shouldn't be doing this. Because if you apply that, you get all the fractals that break apart. Because you can't uphold a lie. Once you tell a lie, you have to keep telling lies to justify the principle that leads to the fractals that leads to the circular. Because it won't be circular. You have broken the loop from interpretation. So this isn't to be interpreted. This is to be followed in the infinite loop. I'll try and... You can draw this up as a diagram. All you have to do is put the infinity symbol, colour it how you want. La 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 la. Write the 5 plus 3 and the equals truth at the bottom, and you lay out the 5 things: the principle, context, conception, morals, revelation, and then the 3, the principles, the fractal and the circular, or the whole. Principle, fractal, whole equals infinite truth. Yay with an A, with the yay nay. Can you see the thumbnail for this? Copy the thumbnail for this. And then just write infinite truth somewhere on it. Or you can have the infinity loop with the 5 and the 3 and just truth somewhere. A bit of digital art that you can create for me. That'll be muchly appreciated. I like. We are like. See, and then I can spank that on as a logo on a thing. Is it now? Well, I didn't design it. So I grabbed an image from somewhere. I changed the colour of the text on the nice little program to slap it in there. Then I came up with the title. So there we go. That's how that went. But I can send it to you if you really want. I shall send it to you once this stream ends via the magic of technology and its wondrousness. Can I do that from here? How do we do that from here? Oh, I do that and then I have to scan that. Yes, I will do that in a bit. So, any questions? Because you said you would think of wacky and wonderful questions when I was going through this. But so far all you've done is understand and agree, which must mean it's true. We cannot get away from it. Because if it wasn't true and it didn't make sense and it seemed dodgy and it couldn't be followed, then we'd break the loop somewhere. And if we haven't broken the loop, then it's true, infinitely true, can be applied as truth everywhere, all the time, every time. So no questions, 0 questions, 0 asking anything of it, or from it, or to it. We've just reached the magical revelation that I can explain something. Wow. I like explaining my revelations. Just a smidge. Well, don't take too long and think of a question while you're doing it. And in the meantime, we shall peruse a few things and see why in the world, whenever I advertise things elsewhere, for whatever reason, they are not seen, they are not heard, they are not witnessed. Because they are not witnessed, someone hasn't perceived them in a context. And that context of the perceived thing didn't lead to a concept. And therefore, morals could not be applied to it. A revelation could not be reached. And therefore, it didn't form a principle. And from a principle not being formed, it couldn't be applied. And it didn't lead to a fractal. And then any one of those fractals could not lead back to the principle. So we couldn't get the whole. The loop was broken. It was not infinite. It was not true. It was a lie. It was a bad. It did not do what it proposed that it would do. Why did it not do that? Did somebody get it in its way? Interpretation. The miracle of interpretation. That's what happened there. Someone interpreted it. Can we all stop interpreting? Can we take things directly as they are told to us? No, so what you're saying is, if you don't understand, you ask a question. You don't just dumb foolery it. You don't remajigger it into your own to try and make sense of it. You take the plain meaning of what's being said, and if the plain meaning doesn't fit the 5 plus 3 and the infinite truth of it all, then you know someone's bullshitting. Someone has lied along the way. Somebody's saying things for their expedience and effect, instead of for the truth of it. And we cannae be doing that. That shall not be the done thing. That is the grifter Maroney. And I can't see why journalists don't figure this out and ask it of politicians. It's like, just break it down. What can you perceive? What is the context in which you are perceiving it? What is the conceptualization of that perceived thing in its context? Apply morals and ethics to it. Come to a revelation. That revelation leads you to a principle. That principle, when applied, leads you to fractals. Those fractals should be able to be applied against the principle, linearly stemming from the principle and in whole back to the principle. Any single one of those fractals should lead back to the principle as it linearly follows logic. And if it does not, you have broken the loop. Someone has told a lie. There has been a bad thing done. Something objectionable has happened. Someone has come to harm because of something that wasn't applied. This is how we know. This is knowledge. This is infinite truth. Somebody showed this to Jordan Peterson. And in fact, I will see if I can link him somewhere. And see if I can find people that know him or are in touch with him to link in this. And then he can go and show this to Sam Harris. And then we can follow on with a nice big discussion about God and such. And moral objectivity and whether things are good or bad. Have we thought of a question from your backiness? Or did it just make so much sense and flow so nicely and bring you to a very solid infinite truth that you can carry with you for the rest of time, that you have no questions, you can make no statements? It's just a thing that was in perfect natural order, as intended. God-given, so to speak. Was it rendered? Was it not of Caesar's? Have we learned something this evening? Pretty legit. Well, then I shall write it down and I shall forward you designs. And then we can consider spanking it on a t-shirt or a cap or something. You know, making merch. And that will be my merch. What can be interpreted? Words can be interpreted. And when you interpret words, if anything, in that case. Okay, so we have words, which are the concept from a perceived thing in a context. That's how we convey things. That's how language is built. Okay, so the interpretation is of the definition of those words. It is of the concept we are trying to relay by using those words. That's where the interpretation comes in. And that's where the morals that you apply to it, or the moral outcome of applying morals, the ethical outcome of applying morals to it, and therefore the revelation, that's where it splits. That's where you can break the loop. That's why they're in the middle. That's why it's an 8, but it's 5 plus 3. Because there has to be the addition in there. There has to be the crossover point in there somewhere. So we can write them round the loop. And then it comes out as truth. Or infinite truth. Infinite at the top, truth at the bottom. I'll draw it up. You can draw it up. I'll send you the concept. So the interpretation comes in the conceptual stage, the concept stage. So you have something you can perceive audibly, namely words, and you apply them to a context in which you are receiving those words, and then you interpret those words. And when you interpret those words, you may come up with a differing concept or differing definition. You may use those words differently to how they should be applied through a common understanding. And that's where it breaks. Does that make sense? That's where the interpretation is. On the concept trying to be conveyed by the words we use. Because then that changes the ethical outcome of applied morals to that concept, and that changes the revelation that you get from it, and therefore you have differing principles. And when you have differing principles, the fractals that you get from supposedly applying the same principle, because we're supposed to be morally objective here, which is why morals are said to be subjective. But if we all had the same concepts, that wouldn't be true. So instead of trying to interpret things, we should all come up with a universal interpretation of words. That is called a definition. That is what a dictionary is for. I wish people would use a dictionary when they're having debates, because that's all it ever comes down to. Someone comes up with a term or a word, and someone says, well, what do you mean when you say that? And it's like, well, we have a dictionary for this. We can settle it there and then. Or you can both come to an agreed conceptualization of what a word means, of a definition of a word. But unless everybody involved is running on the same concept, which means there's no room for interpretation, it is what it is, there is a truth. A truth has been established from the consensus of the majority or of the people involved. That's when you can apply the morals to it, because as soon as you rip that out, and you'll hear it if you listen to some of the debates that I've listened to. There's a certain someone, I'll link you to them, and you can listen to it and you can see where it all goes wrong. Because they don't arrive at the same revelation because they've interpreted the concept. They've perceived the same things. The context was the same. And then when it comes to the conceptualization, they come to a different interpretation of that concept. They come to differing words. And when you have differing words, you have differing morals. So you have differing revelations, and then you have differing principles. And so the fractals that come from the application of those principles won't relate to the other person's principles. And therefore the fractals don't make a whole with the principle, and you break the loop. And there is no infinite truth. That's when you know someone's lying, someone's bullshitting, someone has interpreted something wrongly, someone has taken the morals out of focus and switched them around and made them subjective when they're objective. They have taken the objectivity out of morals, or out of the moral system that we should all be applying. But we can only apply it in this infinite truth if we all have the same concepts from our perceptions in a context leading to the conception or the word or the definition we're trying to convey, which then allows us to apply the same morals to it in the ethical systems we have, which should all lead us to the same revelation of we ought to or we ought not. And then that is how you build the principle. And the principle is, when I address these 5 things, I come to this action that I can take from the perceived contextual conception, that I can apply morals to and come to a revelation, which leads to the principle. Okay? And then once you have the principle, and you apply that principle to the first 5 things, to whatever it is you're applying them to, any object, any feeling, any word, any bit of language, any book, any saying, any phrase, any knowledge, wisdom, any narrative, anything. Anything that you can apply that principle to leads you to fractals that are linear from the principle. They follow logic. And you know they follow logic because any fractal from that principle, you can relay it back to the principle and it agrees with the first 5. As soon as you can't, someone's lied, someone's done something bad, a wrongful thing has taken place, someone is bullshitting you, someone's trying to lead you down their way of thinking which doesn't follow anything, it doesn't follow the loop of infinite truth. And I will link you to a person who does that on the regular, and you'll notice it straight away because I've explained this. Hopefully. And you'll be like, oh, so that person's telling more truth and that person's spreading more bullshit. And they have no principles because the fractals from that principle don't lead back to the principle, can't form a whole, and then you've broken the loop and you can't, both parties in the debate can't relate back to the first 5 things. The truth has gone away. This all makes sense, and I can repeat it over and over again because it's an infinite loop of truth. Make sense? Yay? The thumbs? Give this a thumbs up if that made sense. It's somewhere. Ow! And I shall condense this into a nice little script. Now I've explained it here, and I shall try and record it into a short video that's no longer than 2 minutes and 20 seconds long, and I shall spank it on here, and on Twitter, and on Odyssey, and hopefully someone will see it and someone will agree with it. All makes sense. Tasty. Well, with that considered, and with the principle of we ought to rely on the infinite loop of truth, because the fractal we get from applying truth is it makes sense, because that's what logic is. And then because it makes sense, it agrees with the principle, and we have both perceived something within a context, reached the same conception, we've applied the same morals, we've come to the same revelation, and bingo, we've got the infinite loop again. Okay? It's an infinite loop. It's all true, all the time, whenever you apply it. Hunky-dory. Right. I'm going to disappear and partake in what I partake in. I'm going to bang up a script. I'm going to send you an image. We're going to get that drawn up. It's going to go on a t-shirt somewhere. I bid you adieu. I shall wait for you to say hunky-dory and wave me a good night. And I'll reach you in a minute. All good? Give me a thumbs up. Spank a like on this. Once I see the like, that's when I shall disappear. Likey. Do the thing with the thingy and the YouTube-ness with the likiness. I do like it. Like it. Waviness. Bye bye. For now.